and welcome to Stories of Facilitating Software Design and Architecture. Today, I'm with my usual co-conspirator, Andrew, and we're missing Kenny because he's on holidays. And our guest today is Mike. Mike, do you want to say hello?
Hi, how's it going? Would you like me to tell you a bit about myself?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I'm currently a technical principal at Thoughtworks. I've worked at Thoughtworks for about 5 years across 2 different continents. And before that, I've worked in a variety of organizations in a number of different roles: enterprise architect, solution architect, developer, those type of roles, yeah.
Cool. And so what is your story about today?
So I'm currently working for a technology organization, and I was looking back on my career and I thought there was one role I had which stood out. It was one where I was working for a company that offered other types of services and had an in-house technology team, including an architecture team. And I was reflecting on all of the different types of experience I got from that, actually being part of an organization that's doing something other than technology, and the challenges that you face and how different they are, and sometimes how you get an opportunity to do things differently as well, try different things because the people around you part of our world as much.
Yeah, they think differently. Right, okay. We are keen to hear your story.
Thank you. I'll start right off the bat by finding it a little bit strange to call myself an architect. And the way I got into it was I was working in London and I started having architects come up to me and ask for my opinion on things. And I started to enjoy the conversation more and more. And I thought, this is a really easy job. I just get to give my opinion about things. And they go away and they thank me and everything's great. And then I left the UK and I came back to New Zealand and I became an architect by title. And this is the company that I was wanting to talk about. And I worked for that company twice, which also has informed some of my thinking around this. When I first started working there, I had an entirely different domain to learn. It was a primary industry, an agriculture-based industry. And growing up in New Zealand, I should have known a bit about it, but I didn't. So I was one of 2 solution architects in quite a large company. And I suddenly got thrown in the deep end. I had to actually start making decisions about design and advocating for designs that I was putting forward. And there was some interesting experiences there that I had with vendors trying to challenge my designs. And they were challenging them because what I was putting forward was a little bit more modern than they were wanting to build. They had their own capabilities. And I was really challenging them. I was making it a little bit difficult for them to deliver for us. I thought I was defending the company at the time. When I look back on it, I have questioned whether I was doing the right thing. And some of that questioning came about from just being challenged. It was actually quite confronting to have that for the first time with that type of responsibility. And I think it meant something different because I was working for that company, because there was something at stake. I wasn't just another vendor going and selling something, doing some work and then moving on. My colleagues around me were going to be relying on the solutions we designed. I left that company and that moved to the UK, met Andrew. I worked with Andrew for a little bit in the UK. And then when I moved back to New Zealand, actually went back to work for the same company. And that kind of closed the loop for me as an architect, because I'm not sure I would recommend doing it to everyone, but joining a company you worked at before as an architect, I think it was approximately 4 years later. 4 years is long enough that the things that you designed are probably still there. And the people there don't know you and don't know you designed them and have quite free opinions about them. And it was great because I got both sides of it. I got I don't know why it does this. And I could quite happily answer that and go, it was written down in the design here it is. And they were like, oh, I've never seen that design before. That does make some sense. I understand why you designed it like that, but we didn't see that. So we just went and implemented it. And I also got the ops people going, it is a little bit of a challenge, this architecture, but you know what? It does recover. When things fall over, we just have to restart the services, the queues, and it actually self-heals. And it was, oh, wow, that's actually the first bit of long-term praise from an architecture I'd ever received as an architect. It achieved something that it was designed to achieve. And so if you're brave enough to go back to a company and see how you did, do it. I'm not sure I'll ever do it again. So that was that company. That taught me a lot about being in a company that you were designing for. The second part of going to a company like that is you get to try new things. You get to do things differently if you're not part of a technology organization, because in some ways you are the expert in your company. You're not surrounded by opinions that can potentially overwhelm you. People are more willing to listen to you. So we tried different things, and I discovered my love for externalisation of decisions and developed that, and the love for, as an architect, realizing that it's the biggest thing I could do to help a project succeed was to design the project and not just the system. And by that, it was actually design everything from how the team were going to interact, whether or not people were going to be sitting together, what learning and development the entire team needed, what sessions we were going to have to kickstart the project. And so that was a bit of a revelation as well. I got to talk to people about photons and digital cameras and satellites and photosynthesis and all these types of things just by being an architect. So yeah, go and work for a company that is not a technology company. Be an architect or a developer for that matter.
Super interesting. Like I can, obviously you mentioned we used to work together. I think as a consultant, one of the cool things is you get to move around and see different domains and different clients and do different stuff. And the curse of it is exactly what you said, right? Like it has happened once, but I'm very aware as a consultant, right? I can wave my hands around and tell people to do stuff, and then I can disappear. And like, you never see the long-term impacts of like positive or negative of what you've done, right? Or a mix, probably, right? And I think it's very enlightening. And then the way I approach things fundamentally changed. Again, when I worked one place for 4 years. So we were shaking our fist and cursing various things. And we were like, what idiot designed this? And it turned out it was me or us. 3 years before, when microservices first came on the scene, and we were like, this is amazing. And then we were running them 4 years later. But I think it's really interesting, right? And it's interesting that you say that then made you think more about building the team and how the team works, and like not just like a bunch of human beings collaborating, but more explicitly, because there's a like when you realize that there's a longer term impact, and like getting this knowledge into people's heads, not just in your head and then writing it down, as you said, right? There's a power to that if they, not just for the design of it, but also the running and operation and maintenance and all things. But
yeah definitely.
Interesting.
On that piece of work that I was talking about designing with photons and digital cameras, I got to see a really, really junior developer go from being very shy and not really speaking up in stand-ups to doing a company-wide presentation on how she'd used a JavaScript-based GIS tool, GIS library, to take images and to cut them up and do analysis on them for photosynthesis. And just the confidence that you could see this person gain, and to be able to trace that back to the purposefulness with which we saw that person and their place in the piece of work. That type of thing is very rewarding. Yeah.
That sounds like quite a journey. And I kind of want on this designing these interactions and learnings and the kickstarts. How did you do that? Did you also do that collaboratively, or what gave you the insight? Oh, we should do more than design the system, because the system is also social.
Good question. Yeah, it was working with a really amazing product manager. I'd say one of the product managers that represents it at its purest, in that this person was presenting to the executive team, to the board, on not just the roadmap, but also profit and loss, about the long-term strategic vision for the product. They were also the person who would go out and talk to customers in the field, and who would also have the team that handled support calls, and they would be on the phones themselves, listening to customers. And so this person came with all the passion for the product. And I realized that I had a really great partner to work with. They didn't know my world and I was learning about theirs. And so we agreed that we would actually design this together. And they said, I'll give you whatever you need. I'll come and sit with the team whenever you want. We'll get R&D to come and sit with the team if that's what you're recommending. And it was just someone from the beginning that it felt like a true partnership. And we were focusing on the outcome. We were focusing on working software in the hands of customers from the very beginning. That was the thing that made it.
Super interesting, actually, because I was looking for the heart emoji, but this recording tool doesn't have heart emoji. But I think you're right, Mike. Right, like there is the two things that fundamentally kind of changed how I design systems is running the systems that I designed, and like the second thing we didn't prepare this. The second thing is understanding product management and like understanding product managers and kind of and that kind of thing. That's, again, it's like building the right thing, not building what you think is important, but building what actually someone has guessed is going to have a value, and then building it in a way that it does both things very much transform how you see your designs and your software for the longer term, right? Is that kind of, do you maybe want to dig a bit more into like how that's changed how you think about stuff? Because I think for me anyway, that was a big break.
Yeah. It does come into the way I see architecture in general is I think we are the most privileged people ever. We get to delve into every domain in the world. We get to learn about every part of what humans do. This domain that I was in, I know more about that domain now than most people on the planet, and I never would have done so if I hadn't been an architect. Going and watching the product manager have to do an update to the executive, to go to a board showcase where we got to show off the software, and then to also be able to go on visits to see customers, take developers to see customers and just listen to the ideas. That was vital. It was an interesting one at that company because there were also product folks that didn't want us near the customers. They were a little bit worried about whether or not we could represent the company well, I think, or that we would cloud our things and actually affect their roadmap, and that we would flip the table on it. It is those human interactions, to answer your question, that have been the biggest thing that have changed how I deliver software. Without that, it wouldn't work.
It's funny. Also, really nice to have a guest in New Zealand because there's no latency. So I actually finished hearing you, and I'm not talking on top of you, which doesn't happen often. But so my question here was like about, I think we all we all talk separately about this quite a bit, but we never did it, or not so much here in this forum, which is the building and the importance of trust as a because with the what you're talking about with the product people going like, oh, I don't know if, and can you tell us about your framing for trust when you go into either that project, or like what is your approach to thinking about trust? Not really kind of doing something about it, because I think it's a framing first, isn't it? It's like what are your beliefs?
I went on a course once in London called Crucial Conversations, and I remember one thing reasonably well from the course. Sorry, apologies to the people who ran the course. But the only real thing I remember is intent. Is if you are having a conversation or you're wanting to form a relationship, explaining what your intent is the single most powerful thing. And for me, that goes along with empathy. The intent and empathy being broadcasting your intent and being empathetic. And so when I was having a difficult time in that organization with some of the product managers, it was really trying to understand where they came from. And so I see a trap that some of our colleagues fall into, developers to a degree, but also even BAs, where they will say something along the lines of, I can't understand why they made that decision. And I usually try and unpack it with them and say, what is it that you don't understand a rational way they made that decision, or you don't agree with the decision? Because those are two different paths you can go down. And so trust for me comes about being able to be radically empathetic and not liking what you're hearing, but truly wanting to understand why someone is making a decision they're making. And if you do that and the person can see that you understand them, even then when you disagree with them, at least they trust that they're understood. And if you make your intent very clear, it lays over the top that they understand why you're trying to challenge them. And so that type of communication is trust for me.
It's funny how that comes so often, isn't it? Like this thing of like, why would they do, why would they do this? And it's like, I told them about, it, and you have this conversation and you think it yourself, you're like, why would someone do this thing? We discussed this. We specially talked about this. And yet they did the thing we agreed that you weren't going to do. What's this? And it's like, well, okay. And I think the unpacking thing, and I'm too much of a fan, but I think writing down certain decisions is like where it really helps. And well, we talked about it here, so I can see how we lost something, but at least I think that going to check maybe gives you like some room to, hey, we actually did hear you, we just couldn't do it because reason. Or we decided anyway for it because of this, accepted because X, Y, Z, despite your reason. And it's like, well, we had to make a trade-off and that was it. Sorry. And then it could be like, oh, actually, this is bigger than you thought. Oh, okay. So how do you write it down? Do you always have conversations? Because conversations are time consuming and synchronous.
Conversations also don't end. One of the things that I noticed in that organization and several others since is, I think I mentioned externalisation before. And so that was another thing I learned by having to really care over a long time about something, was what works and what doesn't work. Why does this thing keep coming back around? Why are we discussing the same thing again and again? And I had this moment with an architect from the vendor where we were struggling. We were trying to come to a conclusion and make a decision. And we were almost trying to one-up each other. And we were doing the thing where you're making a point just to try and win the argument. And I said, hang on a minute. And let's use the whiteboard. And I wrote up what this person said. And they were adamant until they saw me write it up on the whiteboard. And then they didn't focus on me anymore. They looked at the whiteboard and they said, that's wrong. And they weren't embarrassed. They were just surprised by what they'd said out loud, meaning something very different to it written down in front of them. And it changed the nature of the conversation. It changed the relationship. And so that for me is the most powerful thing. And something that I've seen done to great effect. We've had a lot of success with our clients. Have said things like, we've spent 3 months talking about this, and a day in a workshop with one of our colleagues running a workshop for them with no knowledge about the subject. They said, we got more done in that day than we got done in 3 months trying to make a decision on this. That's what alignment is. It's not about having a conversation. It's about externalizing it from everyone else, from everyone.
Does that mean is it just putting it on the board, or do you have any more tricks up your sleeve that you get? Like, is this your default pattern, or do you have a few depending on situation, or maybe how do you basically, what's your mindset and what are your tools? I think it's my general line of questions when someone says, "Oh, I have this. This is the concept that I ground everything in." And Kenny likes to call this a container, which is totally not an overloaded word at all, but it's a Dutch thing. So it's like the idea is like, this word that helps you unpack things. And so you have a mindset and a philosophy perhaps, and then you have maybe tools. Can you walk us through this tree of container nerdom?
Absolutely. So when I think about externalization, I was obviously thinking about that specific example, and very much an interpersonal working relationship, and trying to overcome a challenge between myself and a person from another organization who's incentivized slightly differently. We both had the same goals, but they had the need to prove to be valuable to the organization because we paid them and there's a contractual relationship there. I was in a different situation because I was an employee and therefore not as at risk in some ways. My views were a little more protected. And so that was one version of it. And that was very much one-on-one and personal. But when I think about externalization, I've also been thinking about why do decisions stick and why don't they? Why do you sometimes come around to the same decision and the two people who were, or three or four of team, who are involved in the decision have very different views on what the decision actually was? And I've seen a trap that it's fallen into and others fall into. And that's even if you are starting to document things, valuing harmony over precision. And so I've seen people stop too quickly when they're documenting a decision, a design or something else, because people are starting to agree and it's a nice feeling. And we want to wrap things up with harmony. And so where that's come back and bitten me is if I haven't been quite sure that what we've documented is precise and accurate enough, I'm almost always right because it was the other person's view of it that was documented, not my own. And now it doesn't mean I was right about the outcome, but it means that we were in disagreement at the end and we didn't know it until later.
Right. Okay. So you're saying something like, if you're not very precise, then you're, because consensus is a lot more comfortable, then you kind of go into consensus, but actually you decide, but actually you figure out later that you didn't really agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes precision feels like intricacy. I think sometimes it's much better described as plain language. State what you mean. Be very precise with what you mean and what you don't mean. And so, tools and techniques, saying what something is important, but also saying what it is not is just as important. So drawing both positive and negative boundaries around things is just as important. Saying what something does do, what a service will do, saying what it will not do, what it is responsible for, what it's not responsible for. And so the gap, the grey areas between those things are often where people's understanding of things fits, where you can think you're agreeing, but you're not.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I just started doing this doesn't do X, but for like plans for the week. And this I find it really useful for, we're doing this. And it could, let's say something like start guideline, like do some work on guidelines for, I don't know, say observability or something like that. So there's some sort of like long running task, but it doesn't mean I will fix this 35. So yes, starting to write guidelines. This means interview people about what they're currently doing, or perhaps do some analysis on some repositories about what's going on there, or other tasks related to creating a guideline. It doesn't mean going and fixing these 3 issues that people raised. It means it will be included in the guideline and that it should be addressed by the guideline, but it won't be resolved. And it's just saying that I was like, oh, it's obvious that to me, it's like, well, if you're writing about this, that doesn't mean you can solve it instantly. That won't happen this week. In fact, it needs, if you need to solve it this week, you need to do something to address this right now, if it's like a real problem, knowing that this a lot better solution is coming in the future that is more considered, that will take this as input. And it was funny how the whole thing changed from, oh, yeah. And then kind of, feeling that people get let down to being very explicit and setting these expectations. So, I think you're totally right. I think consensus is such a dangerous comfort on agreement because it makes you go round and round, nice roundabout.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter as much when you've got decisions that you can undo in an hour as a team. A team thrives on a silent form of consensus where people who don't really mind just go along with it because they don't have a strong opinion. But where things do matter and consensus just makes you go round and round and round, it's the challenge. I thought of an analogy for that question when it comes to what we're talking about being very precise. And so I've just made up an IKEA wardrobe. And I was just thinking from IKEA's point of view, or IKEA, I think it's pronounced, if I was trying to be a little more accurate, they supply the materials, they supply a handbook to how to put it together. They don't come into your house and make it. And I think that I was hearing your example about the work you've been doing, and I thought the difference between promising to come up with a roadmap and a plan, or maybe a strategy, and saying that you're going to help them implement it is the difference between saying, here's the book that I wrote for you, here's the plan that I wrote for you, and the actual day-long construction of wardrobe. Yeah, and being responsible for if you damage any of it along the way. So being very precise.
Walls around you, like your fingers or whatever, while you're really, your DIY skills are put to the test.
Yeah, I have decent DIY skills, and I still damage the wardrobe a little bit. Only my daughter and I know where we did, and we glued it back together, and we're good.
Yeah, I think we all have stories like that about IKEA furniture. I think they're fun. And it's like also it gives you with a story, right? You build it, and then you're like, oh, and then there is this little thing. Look, it's over here, and you can tell your friends about it, and they're like, wow, that was a really boring story. But that's why they're your friends. You can tell them your boring stories and your really good stories.
Absolutely. Family just don't listen to either of them.
They just broadly. Yeah.
I've heard them a dozen times before.
Anyway, this has been absolutely great. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you did too.
I did. Thank you very much.
Oh, most welcome. And on that cheerful note, we're going to close this episode of Stories of Facilitating Software Design and Architecture. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. And see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you too. Bye.